It was designed in 1935 as an airliner, 21 passenger seats, 2 propeller engines, a cruising speed of about 160 miles an hour. They gave it a name taken from a folk song, Puff the Magic Dragon, a children's record that had been in the charts 2 years earlier, about a dragon that a little boy stops believing in. Every part of that should have been a joke, an obsolete airliner, a nursery rhyme name, a slow, unarmored aeroplane flying low and predictably over a battlefield at night. The idea behind it had been put to the American Air Force before and rejected on and off for nearly 40 years. They were wrong about it. In 3 seconds, one of these aircraft could put a bullet into every single square yard of a football field. And across the entire war, according to the Air Force's own accounting, not one village or outpost defended by one of them was ever overrun. This is the story of the AC-47, and the reason it worked is the exact reason everybody said it could not. But to understand it, you have to start with the dark. For the first years of the war, the night belonged to the other side. The pattern was consistent enough to be predictable. A special forces camp, or a fortified hamlet, isolated, held by a small garrison. The attack would open after sunset, usually with mortars, then a ground assault against the wire. The defenders would call for air support, and air support could not help them. Fast jets were the problem, not the solution. A fighter arriving at 500 knots had a few seconds of firing time on each pass, then had to swing wide and come back around. In daylight, against a target the pilot could see, that was survivable arithmetic. At night, against an enemy in a tree line 50 meters from the friendly wire, it was not. The pilot could not see the perimeter. He could not see where his own people ended and the enemy began. And the margin for error on a strafing run at that speed was measured in aircraft lengths. So the standard answer was flares and hope. Drop illumination, let the garrison fight by its light, and wait for morning. Camps were overrun waiting for morning. What the war actually needed was an aircraft that could arrive at night, stay for hours, see the ground clearly, and place fire precisely enough to hit a tree line without hitting the wire 50 meters inside it. Every single requirement on that list is the opposite of what a jet fighter is good at. The answer had been sitting in the files since the 1920s. The principle is easy to state. If you point a gun out of the side of an aircraft at 90 degrees to the direction of travel, and then fly that aircraft in a steady banked circle, the gun stays pointed at the same spot on the ground for as long as you hold the turn. It is called a pylon turn. The aircraft orbits an invisible pole, and the guns look permanently inward at whatever sits at the base of it. An American pilot demonstrated the idea with a mail plane in 1927. It was put to the Air Corps, and it was turned down. It was raised again in the 1940s, tested in the 1950s, turned down again. The objection was never about the geometry, which nobody disputed. It was about the aeroplane the geometry required. A pylon turn only works if you fly slowly, in a stable and predictable circle, low enough to see the ground, which is also a precise description of an aircraft that is extremely easy to shoot down. For an Air Force built around speed and altitude, that was not a weapon. It was a target. Then, in 1961, an engineer named Ralph Flexman put it forward once more. This time, somebody listened, and a test program was authorized. But what made the difference in 1964 was not the aeroplane, and it was not the geometry. Both of those had been available for decades. It was the gun. The General Electric minigun is an electrically driven Gatling. 6 barrels arranged around a rotating cluster, spun by a motor rather than driven by the gas of its own firing. Each barrel fires once per revolution, then has 5/6 of a rotation to cool and reload while the others work. That arrangement removes the ceiling that had limited every machine gun ever built. A conventional gun is bound by how fast a single barrel can cycle without tearing itself apart. A minigun is bound only by how fast you are willing to spin the motor. One of these pods fires 6,000 rounds a minute. They put 3 of them into the AC-47, 2 firing through the rear cabin windows, 1 in the open cargo door, all of them pointing out of the left-hand side. 18,000 rounds a minute, held on a fixed point from a stable orbit. Now the density figure makes sense. A 3-second burst puts roughly 900 rounds into the target area, spread across a patch of ground the size of a football pitch. That is a bullet in every square yard of it. The aircraft carried around 24,000 rounds, and it could stay overhead for hours. And then it did something nobody had planned for. Roughly every 5th round in a belt is a tracer, chemically treated to burn in flight so the gunner can see where his fire is going. At normal machine gun rates, tracer fire looks like exactly what it is: a string of separate glowing dots traveling through the air. At 18,000 rounds a minute, the human eye cannot resolve the gaps between them. What the men on the ground saw was not gunfire. It was a solid, unbroken rope of red light, pouring out of a point in the black sky down to a point on the earth, and staying there. It did not flicker. It did not appear to travel. It simply existed, connecting the aircraft to the ground for as long as the trigger was held down. That is where the name really came from. Not the folk song by itself, but what the thing looked like while it worked. A dragon breathing fire, walking in a slow circle in the dark. Alongside the guns, the aircraft carried up to 45 parachute flares. Each one burned at around 2 million candle power for roughly 3 minutes. A single AC-47 could turn several square kilometers of jungle night into daylight and hold it there. For a garrison that had spent the war fighting blind after sunset, that was a change of a completely different order. The first armed mission flew on the night of December 23, 1964. Within days, the aircraft was doing the job it had been built for. A hamlet under attack, a radio call, and some minutes later, a slow old transport arriving overhead, dropping flares and laying a wall of fire between the attackers and the wire. Over the years that followed, the pattern held with a consistency that is genuinely hard to overstate. The Air Force's own record of the campaign states that no hamlet, outpost, or fort defended by an AC-47 was ever lost to enemy ground attack. Not one. Whatever allowance you want to make for how such records get compiled, something real is being described there. The presence of a single obsolete airplane over a position at night changed the outcome of the fight underneath it, reliably, for years. And the reason was never firepower on its own. Artillery had firepower. It was the combination of things: precision, endurance, and the ability to be talked onto a target by a frightened man on a radio 50 meters away from it. A jet could deliver far more explosive. What a jet could not do was hold a burning line on one tree line for 6 hours while a radio operator walked it, left 20 meters at a time. On the night of February 24th, 1969, one aircraft demonstrated both halves of what the design actually meant. Spooky 71 was orbiting over Long Bin when an enemy mortar round struck the right wing and detonated. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage. Every man in the cargo compartment was hit. Among them was Airman First Class John Levito, a 23-year-old loadmaster who took around 40 fragments in his back and legs. At the instant of the explosion, another crewman had been holding an armed magnesium flare, ready to drop it. The blast threw him down, and the flare came loose. It was now rolling free across the floor of a wrecked aircraft among spilled ammunition, with its safety pin gone and its fuse already running. When it ignited, it would burn at 1400 degrees. Levito, bleeding heavily and barely able to use one leg, saw it moving across the deck. He could not pick it up, so he threw himself onto it, pulled it in against his body, and dragged himself the length of the cabin to the open cargo door. He got it out. The flare ignited as it fell clear of the aircraft. He was awarded the Medal of Honor and he remains the lowest-ranking airman in the history of the United States Air Force ever to receive it. The aircraft landed. The crew lived. The weakness of the AC-47 was precisely the one the Air Force had spent 40 years objecting to, and the objection was correct. Over South Vietnam, against an enemy armed with rifles and light machine guns, a slow aircraft in a predictable circle at 3,000 feet was an acceptable risk. Over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, against radar-directed 37mm anti-aircraft guns, it was not. 19 of them were lost during the war. The trail missions in particular came close to suicidal, and the aircraft was eventually pulled off them. It left American service in 1969, replaced by far heavier gunships built on the C-130 airframe. The AC-130 carries the same idea, refined across another 50 years, and it is still flying today. Which means the principle that was put to the Air Corps in 1927 and rejected for 4 decades is now approaching its 100th year of frontline service. Everything the objectors said about the aeroplane was true. It was obsolete. It was slow. It had no armor. It flew low and predictably, and it could be brought down by a man on the ground with a rifle. But read that list again from the other direction. Slow meant it could stay. Old and cheap meant there were hundreds of them available, and losing one was survivable. Low meant the crew could see the wire and the tree line as 2 separate things. Predictable meant the man on the ground could talk it onto a target 20 meters at a time. A modern fighter failed at this job, not despite its performance, but because of it. Every quality that made a jet superior in the air made it useless over a hamlet at 2 in the morning. The AC-47 was not a good aircraft that happened to work. It was an obsolete aircraft, and the specific ways in which it was obsolete were the specific things the job required. There is one last thing worth knowing, and it is about the name. The song was written in 1959 and recorded by Peter, Paul, and Mary in 1962. It is a sad song. It is about a boy called Jackie Paper who grows up, stops coming to play, and leaves his dragon alone in a cave by the sea. The crews did not pick it as a boast. The official call sign was Spooky. Puff arrived sideways from reporters and from the men on the ground because of what that tracer stream looked like, and it stuck because it was funny. A nursery rhyme attached to the most concentrated small arms fire ever mounted on an aeroplane. That gap between the name and the thing is the whole story in miniature. A children's song, a 30-year-old airliner, a firing method that had been laughed out of the room since the 1920s. None of it should have worked. All of it did, because somebody finally asked what the job actually required, instead of asking what a weapon was supposed to look like. That question gets asked far less often than you would hope, and almost never in time. If you found this one interesting, subscribe for more stories about the weapons everybody underestimated.